Okay. Welcome, everybody. For those who don't know, I'm David Bell, the President of Bushwalking New South Wales, and I'd like to welcome you to our November meeting. On behalf of Bushwalking New South Wales, I'm on Camaragal country, and I'd just like to acknowledge traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and acknowledge and respect their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their custodianship of the country in which we engage our bushwalking and related activities. So welcome to all. I don't think we had any formal apologies, so we'll go straight into it. We have we're going to ditch the minutes of the May meeting because they didn't get out. So we'll do that in February. That was simple. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Bill Boyd. Some of you will know Bill, not just because of his as a prominent bushwalker in the Northern Rivers area, but also he was a former president of Bushwalking New South Wales and did a great job. And I know here he's also continuing to be the newsletter editor for Northern Rivers Bushwalking Club. Bill's going to talk to us tonight about walking, long distance walking in here and in Europe. And he's an extensive long distance walker, done a lot of this stuff. Particularly in the last few years. And he's got some views and insights into what it's like to walk in different parts of the world. And some parts of the world make it a bit easier for walkers, and other parts of the world, perhaps like here, make it a bit tougher. So I'm going to throw it over to Bill and let him proceed. Okay, over to you, Bill.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that introduction. I echo the acknowledgement to country. I think it's very important. We all understand the value of country wherever we are. And I think we need to acknowledge the people who have walked the country for many years before us and know it probably better than we do. I'll give you a brief introduction, then I'll go back to sharing a screen. You've probably seen several versions of the talk title over the last few months. What I will try and avoid is any comparisons are odious, said somebody. I was going to look up who that somebody was. But what I would like to do is take you on a couple of long walks, partly just to share something which I rather enjoy, partly also to show off some other bits of the world, but also to reflect a little bit on different ways in which walkers and hikers and ramblers, whatever we call ourselves, can get access to the land upon which we walk. And perhaps what I shall leave you with is just little insights into a couple of jurisdictions outside Australia where ways have been found to allow walkers to enjoy the country that they walk through. So if you bear with me, I'll just go to the sharing the screen. Some of you have seen us trying this already, so we know it works. And I'm going to go to play. Now, I hope all of you can see my slides, and I'm sure you can. If you can't, I'm sure you'll let someone know. Okay, now, freedom to roam. I've borrowed that term from Scotland. It's a Scottish, actually, it's a term that's used now widely in Scotland. And I only discovered when I did my research that in England, there's an equivalent term, but it's the right to roam. And I think that in itself is a really interesting contrast and something we'll explore a little bit further as I go through this evening. And so I've just left a question there, some options for bushwalkers. I'm going to quite deliberately avoid commentary on what might or might not be in Australia, because I think it's there's enough interest here, and I'd like to get you to go away thinking about things. I want to open with something here. Now, I've got a bar of people's faces on the left, right-hand side of my screen. Do you all have that? Because if you do, you won't be able to, well, you might just be able to read the look out sign, friendly workers ahead. And I came across this one some 10 years ago. on a hike across Scotland. I also came across little badges like the one on the gatepost, Walkers Welcome Here, Forest Enterprise. And all through that walk, and I'll describe the walk in a minute, we were welcomed as walkers into the area that we were walking. In many places, we were welcomed through working areas. We were not locked out. We were just asked to be careful and be aware. And then we would come across signs like this, and I won't expect you all to read them. However, the import of the big white one is that there's a little bit of caution. A hydropower scheme is under construction. It was significant engineering going on right across the path that we were walking. And there's a start date and a completion date. However, the thing that caught my interest there was a statement that the path is not closed. However, do take care and abide by instructions from any on-site staff for your own safety. Your journey should be unaffected, but on occasion may mean a short delay. And over in the green sign, the Adachnashellach estate, it's a deer hunting estate. There is a notice about deer stalking carrying on, but it's not one, it's one which encourages walkers just to take care, pay attention. Now, the reason I draw attention to these two is that very often, certainly in my more distant past, signs like this would have never been seen. They would have been replaced with dire warnings of trespass and being shot and being taken up to the law. And I'm sure you've seen many in Australia where you come across a closed path which threatens dire consequences for any entry. So these kind of notices that we've seen, along with the friendly workers ahead, really, in my mind, this is 10 years ago, and it would have been about the last 20 so years that these would have appeared in the Scottish countryside. And they mark an incredible shift in attitude towards people who wish to be out in the outdoors, hiking across the mountains and through the estates. The Scottish countryside, I should say, is largely partitioned up into large estates owned either by very wealthy individuals and families, or more often now big corporations. And so they are, they're the domain of the powerful, the rich and the powerful. And so very often they were seen as private domains, very private domains. As a young man, as a mountaineer, I was part of a cadre of people who had no respect for that. We understood the mountains to be a common good, a part of the people's place, and we were quite content to, we didn't ever thought of it as trespass, but we saw it as our right to walk across that land. But having said that, I now understand that it was always very private and of limited access. So you can understand why I would have 10 years ago been quite taken by these signposts welcoming me in. Now, what was I doing at the time? I was following this white line, the Scottish National Trail. It's some 900 odd kilometers, maybe 950. It runs from a little town, tiny village called Kirkyettam, right on the English border. A rather interesting little place. It was the capital, the gypsy capital of the region, and still is. You get very large gatherings of gypsies. Big gypsy weddings are well known there. But it sits nestled in the hills of the borders there. The borders of Scotland have always been a wild place, known for cattle rustling and for others such as skullduggery, and quite a suitable place to take a start for a long walk. The walk then follows a number of paths, some quite sedate, some less so, up through the Central Highlands, up the Cairngorms, and eventually onto the west coast, up the West Highland Way. I'll show you a few images of that to give you some idea of the kind of walking that involved. It took myself and my wife 40 days. You might say 40 days in the wilderness, but it was a wonderful wilderness to go there. Now, how does such a thing be made? Well, over on the left-hand side, you can see the cover of a book, Scotland End to End, and a man there called Cameron McNeish. Now, he's perhaps a little older than I am. He was a mountaineer for all his life. And when I was young and he was young, uh, the very first long distance walking trail in Scotland, the West Highland Way, was conceived and created. And he was among a vocal group of mountaineers, myself included, who thought it was a rather uh, unnecessary idea. It was anathema to the idea of going out into the wild in the wilderness and being at one with nature in the mountains of Scotland. He has, like I have, come round to the view that in fact it's not been a bad idea, and for a number of reasons. Primarily, it has introduced a very large number of people into what we would call bushwalking here, mountaineering or walking or rambling. And it's allowed them to undertake quite a significant walk, a truly amazing achievement for many people in relatively safe conditions, or at least controlled conditions. So you have a path that's designated, there are maps, there are guides, there are places to stay, and so forth. And I don't know what the numbers are, but there's certainly many thousands of people complete the West Highland Way every year. Now, that was the first of what became many routes. And I think what I've got next, the next map shows Scotland with a number of routes on it. It's by no means the complete set, but the number 2 is the West Highland Way going from Glasgow to Fort William. The long one across the bottom, it's the Southern Uplands Way, much longer route. And in amongst it, a number of shorter routes. I've, over the years, completed one number 4 up to Aviemore-Buckie, that's Speyside Way, taken part in most of the Fife number 9. And actually, on the walk across Scotland, walked parts of all of these routes. So Cameron McNeish's idea, and this was only in the last 15 or so years, was to link together parts of these routes and put in little joiners and give, if you like, a sampler of hiking in Scotland. So you can see there's the signposts. Every now and then we'd come across St Cuthbert's Way. It's from the abbeys of the Borders, which were very important medieval centres, a route that took the monks between the abbeys and the Holy Isle in Northumberland. There's the Cross Borders Drove Road, the number of droving roads. These are long-held historical routes, and some of them been turned into long walks. The Badenoch Way is up in the Highlands, and the one just behind my face on my screen, the John Muir Way. Some of you may well know of John Muir. He was a seminal character in the world of national parks, largely responsible for, I think, one of the first national parks and the movement in North America. He was a most remarkable man, a walker, unlike any that I've ever come across. As a boy, he lived up in Minnesota, somewhere up there, wanted to see the Gulf of Mexico, so he chose to walk there. And he walked there as a young man. I think he was 17 or 18. And he paid his way exhibiting a wooden mechanical clock that he'd built, which he carried with him. He went on, of course, to live in California, went up to Alaska, did some quite remarkable things. However, he was a Scotsman, and his first walk was from a little town, the other side of Edinburgh, over to the west coast at Helensburgh to get a boat to America. He was a farmer's son. His father was rather unforgiving, and the farm they farmed became even less forgiving, and they had to give up and migrate to America. So although it's not shown here, the John Muir Way connects the east coast and the west coast of Scotland. And it's again another route that we followed some parts of. So what are we looking at? We're looking at wide open spaces. The big view into the distance is the borders, borderlands. We're coming off the hills on the English border. The signpost there tells us that we're on St. Cuthbert's Way, and we're about to walk virtually as far as you can see and well beyond. In that particular occasion, however, the good weather you see there lasted for a day. The next day it was not quite so nice. So I don't have photographs of the teeming rain, which you might expect of Scotland. It was almost the last rain we were to see, actually. In 40 days, we got about 2 days rain. And the rest of the day, the walk was in weather more like the one you can see there. You can see that we're walking through farmland. There's a long tradition of hill farming, and it's all managed land. Later on, we're into the Highlands, which is managed in a different way. So we're relying on farm tracks and access through people's land. Some parts of the way we would follow the historic canal system. The Industrial Revolution came relatively early in Scotland, and through the Midlands of Scotland especially, connecting the main ports, the main centres of industry. A series of canals were built. They're quite remarkable engineering. And for a day or two, we were able to walk on horizontal land, following the path. You can just see it winding under the bridge there. These were the paths the horses would follow to pull the canal boats and barges from one end of Scotland to the other. As we headed a little further north, we'd by now passed Glasgow. We're heading up into the Trossachs, into slightly wilder land. This is the beginning of the Highlands proper. As you can see, the terrain is beginning to look a little more rugged. And we're still in farmland. There's usually rough grazing low, probably sheep grazing up in the tops, deer beyond there. All of these landscapes are managed. They're all owned and they're all managed for some resource or another. And eventually we get up into the great Cairngorm Mountains. This is a remarkable set of glacial valleys, long walks right up into the mountains, and down on the right-hand side there, the remains of a lodge that used to be a really rather grand house way out in the middle of nowhere, which is now in ruins. It was the site of our campsite, but just keep in mind these buildings while we look at the wide open spaces and consider them to be fairly natural. Again, we're dealing with managed land, managed estates, owned by people. And I do have a memory, by the way, it just come to me, looking at the big picture of the river, of walking up this glen during one of the deer hunting seasons with a small group of people, hyper alert to the fact there'll be people out there shooting deer, and things that move, such as walkers, could potentially be mistaken as deer. So we all made sure we had our bright red and bright yellow hats on rather than our usual brown ones. And we keep going up into the Highlands. By now I'm crossing over to the West Highlands. No, I'm just coming straight out of the Cairngorms and into the Western Highlands. And you can see we're really hitting mountain terrain. And a lot of the track by now is well, very slight tracks. It's often off track. We're navigating across land like this until you get to the West Highlands. And this is when the landscape becomes truly spectacular by any measure. The Cape Wrath Way goes from Fort William to Cape Wrath. It's a set of routes, very ill-defined, one of the great challenges for mountaineers and walkers in Scotland. A lot of navigation and a lot of fairly challenging climbs, descents. There was one day which we had to miss simply because the weather turned bad for a day, and we were due to climb about 1,000 feet up, cross over what was reputed to be a very tricky crossing atop of a waterfall, then come back down the other side. I couldn't get any straight answers from the locals. They all talked about fishing people out the bottom of the river, which didn't seem very a good idea. So we took a detour. And where are we heading? This is where we're heading, to the very far north of Scotland. This is Sandwood Bay, uh, got to be one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. It was a bit of a walk in. I think it was 4 or 5 miles, something like that. We got there were surfers, there was picnickers, um, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd all gone home, and we had this entire bay. The bay is about a kilometre and a half wide. We had placed ourselves camping uh, on what really is one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And if you look very, very carefully on the right-hand photograph, away in the distance is a little white dot, and that's the Cape Wrath lighthouse. It isn't, it's like all lighthouses in Britain now, it's been automated, but there is a man that lives there and welcomes you in at the end. The land between where I'm standing and where the lighthouse is, however, is Ministry of Defence land. So again, there's issues of warnings that if they are undertaking exercises, you may not be allowed in. In fact, you most certainly won't be allowed in. It's really the only land that we encountered where there would be an absolute embargo on walking through it. Fortunately for us, the day that we hiked up through that piece of country, there was no military to be seen. What were we doing? Well, camping some of the way camping and living in, I'll show you bothies in a minute. But you can see we were able to camp pretty much where we wanted. So wild camping was quite acceptable. The green tent that you see there is an interesting little story. We have a friend in the Bushwalking Club who does a lot of research, and she discovered that this tent was on very special sale at one of our local camp shops. It would be ideal for some of the camping I was doing. She gave me the catalogue, sent me packing there, and we went in and bought it. Fantastic. It was a brilliant tent. Kept all the weather out, kept the midges out. And when I got back, I thanked her for putting us onto this tent. And she was aghast. She said, I never meant you to walk with the thing. It's far too heavy. Well, it was heavy, but it kept everything out and kept us well. The other places that we stayed in are buildings like this. They're known as bothies in Scotland. And they are usually old houses that belong to the estates. They've been shepherds' houses. They could be stables. They might even be somewhat grander houses that have fallen into disrepair. And certainly when I was a young man mountaineering, we knew of lots of these. They often didn't have windows and doors, but they gave you shelter, and they became well known. There's a extensive inventory of these houses available to mountaineers as a place of safety and refuge. Now, since that time, the Mountain Bothies Association has done a remarkable job of bringing some of these houses back to life. They are often in truly remote areas, and when you go in and you realize that a group of people have been hiking in, bringing doors and beds and windows and all sorts of things in, basically to make these buildings weatherproof. They're not particularly comfortable, but they're certainly weatherproof. And it gives you a place where you can roll your mat out and have a night's sleep out of the weather. There are various rules about them. Strictly speaking, you shouldn't be planning to stay in them. You should have a tent with you. A number of walkers do walk from bothy to bothy, but it's a little unwise, and sometimes in the mountains, I think, to expect that you'll get there. There's a lot of social history. You can't quite see the signs I've put up there, but a lot of them memorialize mountaineers and people who have made the effort to provide this kind of free accommodation to mountaineers. So the question is, how did we manage to get access to such land? I did say, I wonder if we can remove the the faces there because I've got a little bit of writing there. I'll wing it. As I said, in the past, we would have just gone on that land and really didn't think about the consequences of trespass. In 2003, the Land Reform Scotland Act was enacted. And by all accounts, it was a long time coming. There was a great deal of negotiation. And what it established was access to land. I'm just going to... There we are. So we can see the writing a bit easier. It was an act of Parliament establishing statutory public rights of access to land for recreational or other purposes. And what it did, it allowed every person to stay on all land, obviously with some constraints, but basically allowed us to walk on nearly all land in Scotland. Now, there are provisos, responsible behaviour, and the Act was backed up by a whole lot of work done to both allow access, but also to encourage responsible use. Local authorities, national parks, are the people who uphold and manage them. But one of the most important things is that, okay. So here's the Ramblers British Association advertising access rights, that you can nearly land, or you can walk on all land. And they actually explain this in much more detail on their website. But you'll notice at the bottom, it's important to understand your access rights and your responsibilities. And this is where the Scottish Outdoor Access Code comes in. It's quite an extensive statement about public access to outdoors. And it's very interesting that it doesn't just talk about responsibilities for people who are accessing it, like ourselves, by walkers, but it actually talks about the responsibilities of landowners to allow access and to facilitate it. Now, you might think that that's going to be quite an onerous request from landowners, and I don't know too much of the history around the 2000s, but I expect there was a huge amount of resistance from landowners when this Land Act was being put through. Land has always been the preserve of the rich, the powerful, the wealthy, and there's always been a strong sense that it should be private. I think they tolerated mountaineers in the wilder parts, but certainly some of the areas we walked through, some of the farmland, would have been harder for us to do maybe 20, 30 years before. So what's happened? Well, my best guess is that there's been a lot of very clever discussion and negotiation with people at the farmers' lobby bodies, the landowners. There's probably been a lot of funding, because one of the things that I have seen as we walked was a vast improvement in the quality of the land management of the land we were running through. Everywhere we went, with one exception, everywhere we went, fences were being repaired and replaced with good modern fences. Gates were being built that would work. Houses were being restored. And in fact, what I saw was a vast amount of, if you like, regional development, of economic development. The estates date way back to the times of the clearances, a couple of hundred years. They were in their heydays in the 19th century, largely on the decline during the 20th century. And by the time I was mountaineering, the estates were understaffed, they were ragged, and they were becoming run down. And what we observed all the way through the walk were estates that were now being revived. They were becoming economically viable, contributing to the local economy, And I can only think that it is part of the land reform that was part of that piece of legislation. And there must have been government funding helping landowners to improve their land. Now, really interestingly, part of the big improvement was a growth of rural tourism. A lot of these old houses, I showed you the derelict house in the moors, a lot of them are being rebuilt and are now accommodation for top-end tourists. There's a lot of restoration of country habits as horse riding is coming back, and holidays for horse riders is becoming more popular, and so forth. So it appears that not only have walkers been given the freedom to roam, they've been given some responsibilities to behave properly. That's implicit in the access code. And it appears that everyone has. We saw almost no litter, no damage. The only ragged estate we saw was one where clearly the owner didn't want to take part in any of this. And it still looked like the good old day, or the bad old days of broken fences and keep out signs and so forth. The other side is supporting landowners to value the people that come onto their land and welcome them in. And as you saw right at the beginning, we end up with welcoming signs rather than unwelcoming signs. So that's the first story I wanted to tell you. I think it's been an interesting journey. I'm sure it's not been smooth to get this freedom to roam, but it's certainly a very positive story, and I think people in Scotland will truly appreciate their access. So what I'm going to do now, I'll go back on to playing again. See if I can. Right. The second story I wanted to talk about is south of the border in England. Now, when I talk about this, what I appreciate, you may not appreciate, but we're dealing with two completely different legal jurisdictions. They may be part of a United Kingdom of sorts, but Scottish law and English law are very different legal systems, and while there's on some occasions some crossover, the fundamentals of the legal system are quite different. And this has some consequences in terms of access to countryside for walkers. I've done a number of walks through England. One of my intentions is to complete the length of the country at some point. We're not far off it. But last year, no, that's not true. This year, we asked our good friends where they'd like to walk, and they suggested the Viking Way. I hadn't heard of it, but naturally it's in eastern England, Lincolnshire. Those of you who have any idea of British history will know that the Vikings and the Danes and other Norse people spent a lot of time living and ruling Britain. And we thought it would be quite interesting to follow the ways of the Vikings. I don't think it would be a spoiler to say we discovered almost nothing about Vikings. It was a nice marketing tool to get us to walk through a county, Lincolnshire, which I don't think otherwise I would have ever visited. There was a little bit of a modern sculpture. Here's a sort of Viking ship type seat with me looking happy in it. So I got a bit of Viking, and there's a bit of contemporary Viking sculpture. And a little bit of signage playing on the Viking helmet, which a number of people I know who are into Vikings tell me they never had horns in their helmets, but there it goes. We don't let a good story get in the way of the truth. So we're on public footpaths here. We're winding our way down from the river at the Humber, down through, you can see on the map, the green area there is the Lincolnshire Wolds. We're dealing with very different countryside. The highest point on the Lincolnshire Wolds, which is the highest point in Lincolnshire, is 167 meters above sea level. So here we are, striding across the mountains of Lincolnshire. The Then it wanders down onto the flats. These are almost at sea level through the old medieval city of Lincoln, and further down, eventually ending at Oakham. I spent a very happy week walking the northern end of this, more or less through the Lincolnshire wolds down to Lincoln. It's a very different kettle of fish, if you like. It's rural land, very much. Lincolnshire is one of the most productive agricultural counties in England. So it's all agricultural land. So we're dealing there with quite a different sort of environment to the one I've just described before. We're dealing again, all private land, company land, or private family land. Wheat, barley, rye, a lot of that going on. Lots of rural English countryside. There's the poppies. And what else have we got? We came across these remarkable fields of flowers. Now, this is actually quite interesting. This is deliberate sowing. It's a new form of farming that's going on in an attempt to try and restore soil, some nutrition back to the soils that have been farmed for a very long time. And farmers are being subsidized, I believe, to sow these mixed flower crops. It's also bringing back insects. As some of you may know, that there's a serious problem with insects. Insecticides and broad-scale agriculture has been enormously damaging to the insect population and likewise birds. So a lot of farmers are getting into conservation farming. It's quite fascinating to walk through all of this. But you can imagine, how do we walk through it all? Oh, sorry, before we do that, we follow, in some places, old railway lines. This is Stixwold, an old Anglo-Saxon name, turned into a railway station, now defunct, and there we are walking along an old railway embankment. So there are some public areas which are easy to get access. They give us interesting local heritage. Look at that great building of a railway bridge. There's a lot of social interpretation goes along on these walks as well. The other aspect of this, before I come back to access across this land, the other aspect of this land, and we're down in the flats here, is there's a very rich history of abbeys and other religious houses. They're all defunct now, of course, since 1560s. The Reformation destroyed them, but for several hundred years before, this area was one of the most important wool producing areas of England, and it was the churches that dominated that. There's precious little left. We walked across fields that look like the one in front of you. You might make out just a few little humps and hollows, but the remains of one wall might give you an idea of just how magnificent these buildings were. This countryside now has small farms, well, large farms peppered across it, relatively few people living in the countryside, but in the past, it would have been extremely full of people. And there's the reason, sheep farming, all linked back to this one, Lincoln Cathedral, which was the central cathedral. So part of our walks, we passed something like 7 or 8 of these religious houses, or the remains of them, all within sight of this cathedral, and all linked to the local river, along whose banks we also walked. As with all English walks, there are plenty of old churches, like this one here, which had almost become non-functional. A lot of churches are losing their flock, so to speak. They might have somebody visiting once a month. But if you look very carefully at the stained glass window, you'll see there's a Jesus figure. And who are these people walking in behind? Looks awfully like bushwalkers. And it is, they're ramblers. And the Ramblers Association came to the rescue of this church. It was an important travellers' church, and they've raised funds for its restoration And in acknowledgement of the work that they've done to bring this one back to life, they've got a stained glass window for them. And there are special services apparently held for ramblers. Um, I'm not sure I've ever seen a service held for a bushwalker. No, we have had them, haven't we? We've commemorated the bushwalkers up in the Blue Mountains and so forth. So perhaps not so unusual. And of course, there are pubs. The King's Head goes back to 1296 or thereabouts. The beer's a bit fresher and it's very good. We had to go in there each evening just to refresh ourselves after such a grueling walk across the hilly terrain of Lincolnshire. So the question is about how, and I might just skip out of here so we can see the words I've written there. What's the access? How can we walk across a country like this? Well, England has a different approach to the public access to its land. There are public rights of way, and I'd always thought there was just a singular thing. It's a right by which the public can go along routes across the land. They are defined routes. So unlike Scotland, it's not a public right to go anywhere you want. You go on clearly defined routes. And some of these routes, by all accounts, have a very, very long history. So they're well established in the local community. And wherever we go, they're clearly marked. There's public rights of way. This is farmland. Please keep your dog on a leash. So there's a little bit of reminder to behave yourself. That's organised by the local council. And the local council is one of the bodies that ensures that these public rights of way are maintained. So they are public rights, but they're not public land. They're private land upon which the public have got access, legal access. And the advice there from the ramblers is, we ask you to bear this in mind, that they cross private land. Be responsible when using them. So again, there's a sort of parallel of right and responsibility. But what I discovered when I started looking into it is that they have a curious sort of status. They're all highways in English law. And I would have thought a highway is a thing we drive on, but it appears that everything from the path that we're walking through that field through to a pavement, through to a road, is a highway. Now, I put up the picture of us walking through the fields because that is quite typical. While this is a private farmer's field, they will leave a strip for people to walk across. And even when it's been ploughed, they'll make sure there's a strip there to walk across. So that line has probably been there for several hundreds of years, well recognized. And I could imagine that if a farmer so much as suggest they plan to cross it, the locals would probably be not very happy either. There are a whole number of rights of way. You can see the signage there for public bridleways. So horse riding is important for many people. And some of those bridleways we shared as a public footpath. Some of them are separate from a footpath. And then as I looked into it further, I realized, of course, there's a long history, and comes with a long history is long complexity. So we've got footpaths, which we followed, bridleways, which we followed. There are byways open to all traffic. So sometimes you'd find yourself walking on a trail, a bit like the one in the background there, which was actually open, and you had to just watch, share it with traffic. There were roads used as public paths, which I hadn't quite appreciated. Some of our route maps took us on to make what I thought were main roads or even back roads. And we thought, well, that's a bit cheap. But it turns out that these are actually designated public paths as well as roads for traffic. The restricted byways, those are ones which have some notional restriction, maybe temporal, maybe for certain users. There are green lanes. We came across lots of those. I did have a photo earlier, but I think it hid behind the faces. You've often got to look for them fairly carefully. They're little narrow hollows through forests and woods, often a bit overgrown, um, but they'll take you perhaps from one road through to the next road or from one side of a woodland to another. There's permissive paths, which I'll talk about in a minute, and pavements or footways, which we'd know as pavements, so sealed walkways. So you see, it's quite a complex, quite a different sort of regime to the one I found in Scotland. Now, permissive, I'm going to go back up onto the big, because I prefer the large screen. We came across a lot of these permissive footpaths, and they're not paths that you have an absolute right to go on. It's by permission of the person who owns the land, and that's been negotiated. And there is, again, a tradition of negotiation between local authorities and a private owner, or a bushwalking club and a private owner, or some sort of other advocacy group. I will go back. I apologize for this. And I'll read out the black sign, the Highways Act 1980. Notice under section 31, the public way may walk this route by permission of the landowner if it is not it is not dedicated as a public right of way. So that's fairly clear, but there's a permission that's been granted. Now, who does this? We kept coming across, it's quite interesting, a lot of signage just informing the public. So here's the Lincolnshire Field Paths Association, and they've been very active in maintaining signage, putting notices out, informing the public. It says here, you probably can't read it, but I'll read it out. The Lincolnshire Footpaths Association works with interested parties. Sorry, my glasses have been going, my eyes are going. To discuss and resolve difficulties regarding the whole range of field paths, e.g. public footpaths, bridleways and green lanes. Whenever possible, we cooperate with local authorities to see that none are obstructed either by crops or development, and on it goes. So you've got associations who are dedicated and quite expert about this. I think they have to be. The grubby sign on the other side was the permissive access through some farmland and woodlands we came across, and it's run by Nature England. So that's a national body that's done the negotiation with local people to allow people in to a particular area which has conservation rights. The middle sign, I had to put this one up. I've come across this fabulous bushwalking club called the Wanderlust Rambling Club. Isn't that wonderful? And it's a local Lincolnshire club, and they've been active in encouraging rambling for a long time. And in fact, I came across an entire walk that they've designed and signposted and publicized, a circular walk for their members and members of the public. You can go on their website, download the maps, and take yourself off. Yearly membership for the price of £1.50. That's not bad, is it? So enjoy friendly ramblers to suit all. Come and join us for 2 to 3 free rambles. Now, all of this, of course, comes with responsibilities. And I'll close just by bringing attention to the Countryside Code. This is the English Countryside Code, despite the fact it's published by government of UK, which some of us north of the border think is just the English government, but we won't go there too much. It's extensive. There's a lot of information available. You can see the headings there: respect everyone, protect the environment, enjoy the outdoors. But there's advice for land managers. I came across a very informative site which tells land managers to know their rights and responsibilities, understand visitors' access rights, keep rights of way usable, help visitors to act responsibly. So there's a really nice sort of collaborative behavior. Make any signs easy to understand, create a safe environment, and know who to contact. So there's lots of information there. again, my experience of walking the Lincolnshire Way, in fact, all the ways that I've walked, is that it doesn't appear that walkers do a lot of harm and damage. Occasionally, you might see some litter. It's very rare, actually. Um, Well-kept gates are easy to open and close so they don't get damaged. There doesn't appear to be a lot of trespass off the paths. So I think this sort of regime of identifying uh, and acknowledging uh, places of access, right of access, along with the responsibilities of all those involved, seems to work as a method. And with that, I'm going to give you a sunset. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to throw it open for questions, and you can put the questions into the chat, and I'm happy to read them out. I've got one already from John Gray, but I was going to ask you, Bill, started off. You said in Scotland you can basically set your tent up where you like. Does that right extend to the English situation, or are you not allowed to just put your tent up on a right of way?
Um, no, I'm just trying to get rid of this. Never mind. Right, got it. I can see you all. No, English. A as far as I know, there is no right to camp wherever you wish in England. So it's quite different. All of the access that I've seen there is about access for walking or riding. Uh, there's also I did notice actually constraints on bikes, but camping is not something you can do. I think when the Land Reform Act in Scotland came out, one of the really radical things was that notion that you could camp more or less wherever you are. Like there are very clear exceptions. You can't camp in somebody's garden or within a certain distance of a house. And the banks of Loch Lomond, which are overrun with tourists, and there's not a lot of space between the water and the road, is the only place where you can't camp where you wish. Having said that, most people wish to camp somewhere where they have a bit of privacy. They don't want to sort of irritate the people around them. From what I can gather, people tend to be quite circumspect about where they're camping.
Actually, Leonie Leonie Bell has said you can only camp in a campground in England or with the farmer's permission.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've
Um,
forgotten about the farmer's permission. That's of course that's a long standing agreement.
yeah.
Yeah.
John, just coming back, John Gray posed a question. Just coming back to Scotland, he says surely there are some areas still restricted. For example, immediately around a residence.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Yeah.
And I talked about the MOD terrain, which has limited access, the Ministry of Defence. But interestingly, it's not an absolute, they do allow people in.
Yeah. Um, did you see any? This is another question. Did you see any abuse of tracks, for example, by mountain bikers?
Um, we didn't see many mountain bikers. Oddly enough, the one that we did see um, was a friend of Cameron McNeish, whose son had taken him up a mountain. He discovered it was a wee bit too tough. His bike had got broken. So we watched him march down that glen with his bike over his shoulder. But that's an aside. Um, there are areas, some of in fact, south of Scotland in the southern uplands, there's the world state-of-the-art mountain bike park. And I think a lot of the mountain biking is in mountain bike parks. We didn't see a lot of evidence of it, I have to say. And certainly in England, I didn't see any evidence. And I'm just thinking back on all the other walks I've done. I don't think I've barely seen a mountain bike in England at all.
Um, Sam Neri has thrown a comment here about Norway. Norway has the Outdoor Recreation Act 1957, which allows you the right to roam over any uncultivated land. You have to camp over 150 metres from an inhabited house or cabin. In winter, you can roam anywhere on cultivated land if it is covered in snow.
Oh, thank you. That's really interesting. I was starting to think of looking over to the Nordic lands because the slide I couldn't find is a one I took in IKEA. There's a little, if you go there, you'll see a little round sign which talks about the Swedish uh, belief of access to all their land. Um, but I have hiked in Norway, and that certainly feels right. I mean, the Norwegian access to land is just in their blood. I think if anybody tried to stop them, they would have a serious problem.
Yeah. Sam Garrett Jones says it's similar situation in Sweden. So probably
Yeah,
it's across the Nordic
that's
countries.
good.
Leonie's just added, I lived in the UK for 8 years, walking with the Ramblers Association. We campaigned for decades for right to roam.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, I think, but it is interesting, isn't it, that the English system calls it a right to roam, but in Scotland it's a freedom. I think, did you say in Norway it's a freedom to roam? I think I don't know
Oh,
what the implications are there, but there's a subtle difference in that.
yes. Yeah. Um,
Mm.
Sam might want to add if he knows that in Norway. Um, Look, we don't have any more questions, comments, so we might, unless anyone wants to throw. Oh, here you go. Sam has just said in Norway, right of access and right to nature.
Yes. And I think that was the implication of the little statement I saw in IKEA, that great source of bushwalking knowledge. But I think that reference to the outdoors and nature is important and the connection between the two.
Okay, I think we might have. Here you go, Kirsten. Does Scotland have any plans to reforest?
Oh, it's doing it. Yes, yes. Now, there's a rewilding, a massive amount of rewilding going on. There's a little bit of there's always controversy, but there's a number of private conservation societies that have been buying up land and scattering seedlings over hillsides. It's We did actually walk through a few of those, and they're fenced in, which is one of the anxieties of some conservationists about closing land off. Um, but certainly there's a big interest in rewilding in Scotland.
Yeah. I did read somewhere they reintroduced beaver, which seems to have caused a lot of
Oh
controversy in
yeah.
some areas.
Well, there's beaver in London now, and there's beaver down
Are there?
in
Oh,
Devon, and certainly up in Scotland. Every now and then somebody suggests he's reintroducing wolves, but we'll see.
Um, well, Leonie's throwing another one in. Not all
Yeah,
footpaths, she's talking about England, not all footpaths are open due to local resistance. Ramblers pushed for all counties to have all paths open by 2000. The only county which achieved this was the Isle of Wight.
right.
Yes.
Yes. Look, I expect it's more widespread now, but I do know, in fact, I think one of my uh, nieces is involved in collating data, historical data about footpaths. So there's obviously still concern about their continued use. And there's a group of people obviously interested in trying to gather as much evidence to demonstrate their historical validity. So I would say, Leonie, it's probably keep watching, be alert. I suspect everyone is some counties will be more comfortable with it than others, I'd expect.
Um, Here's another question. There seems a lot of historical pilgrim walks in Europe. We're obviously thinking of the Caminos and so forth.
Yeah,
Are there any in the UK? Now, the one I was thinking of would be something like St. Cuthbert's Way.
Cuthbert's. Yep. Well, there's St. Cuthbert's Way. There's actually the beginning of the Via Francigena, which goes from Canterbury I think to Dover and then over to France. Um, I would expect there'll be more. They seem to pop up all over the place. I was just walking in Latvia and we came across the Camino de Santiago comes from Tallinn all the way across Europe. Um, so I think we'll see if they're not there, there certainly will be more. Oh no, there is one through Fife now. I came across that as well. Um, so yeah, there'll be more.
Sam Garrett Jones has helpfully put in the chat function website, the Pilgrim's Way, all one word,
Oh yeah,
.co.uk.
it's a fabulous site.
Winchester to Canterbury. It's got there, yeah. So
Yeah,
they're around. Um,
yeah,
and nine. Sam's another Sam has had 9 pilgrimage walks in Norway equals 3,000 kilometres in total.
yeah.
So they're around.
Yes.
Just going back, Mark Norrick asked a question. Can you clarify what are the rights to roam in Australia in national parks, government land?
No, I can't. Um,
I mean, I can't really answer that,
I
except obviously you can walk off, we call it off track walking in national parks, and
yeah,
people can do that. I think government land depends what you mean. I mean, obviously, places like defence land is usually off limits and
yeah,
other times. So it's probably the answer. Those rights are probably much more restricted in Australia, I'd expect.
yeah. I haven't come across the term rights to roam or freedom to roam here, but I mean, national parks, we would assume, are largely open to hiking, although there are some places that are restricted for conservation values and so forth. So,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, the other, and we do have some access into state forests,
yeah.
unless they're being used, for forestry activities. Um, Sharon O'Toole has asked. Um, I had an interview with ABC Radio this morning about packing out human waste poo tubes. She knows obviously something about this topic. Is this mandatory for camping in Scotland?
Uh, I didn't come across anything that told us what to do. Generally, wild camping, people dig a pit. Um, but having said that, any of the places I was at were not intensely camped upon. Certainly, I've seen in Tasmania areas where a toilet waste has been shipped out because it really is too rich for the environment there. But I didn't come across anything. There's no commentary there that I've seen, and certainly we were walking enough. We'd pop into a local hotel occasionally, so we could use civilized toilet facilities. Shall we say it that way?
Um, would bothies have a toilet normally?
No, they don't. No,
Okay.
they're unplumbed. There's no power, no water. Uh, you'd be collecting from a local stream, boiling it, or purifying it in some way, and taking a bit of a walk with a trowel.
Yeah. Mark, again, to walk in a national park in Tasmania, you need to pay for a day or 1 month or yearly pass. General public day pass in around $27 per day. Um, yeah, other places it might be in other national parks. You don't necessarily need to pay to walk, but you may need to pay to stay at a campground.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
think a lot
it
of
varies from state to state.
yeah, and some state to state, it's a car permit for entry, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
the national parks in Britain are a different sort of national park. They're a total landscape. So you'll have farmlands and industry and people and towns and roads going through it, as well as wild places. So the requirement for a permit is not the same as it is here.
Yeah. Look, we've gone well past 8:30, so I'm going to thank you, Bill, for that. I'm
Thank you.
obviously things thinking about how it is in Australia, it's very different, um, particularly outside national parks. So whether that will ever change, I don't know. But certainly you've presented, I think, obviously encouraging people to look at the opportunities for walking in the UK. And as you mentioned, one of the, I think, incentives for local areas to encourage roamers and ramblers and walkers is the boost to the local economy.
Yeah.
And we've seen, certainly in Australia, we've seen that, walking trails do benefit local economies. And I'm thinking also of those recently opened rail trails in your part of the world,
Oh
which I
yeah.
believe have been great success, and the community is really right behind them. So those
Yeah.
sorts of things, we should be, encouraging that.
So
Um,
I'll just finish with a little
yeah,
plug. I'll finish with
yeah.
a little plug. Um, if anybody's up this way, 14th of December, we're opening, well, I'm not personally, but the community is opening the next section of the Northern Rivers Rail Trail from Lismore to Bentley, which is a huge achievement. I expect there's going to be celebrations. Certainly, the club's going to be putting on some activities. So if anybody's up, you're more than welcome to come and join us.
Is that the last link for that project, Bill, or is there one more link to go?
Unfortunately, not. Byronshire is being a bit recalcitrant. So Tweedshire's done their bit. Lismore Casino, Richmond. There's still a section north of Lismore or northeast of Lismore to come. So there's still more to come, but we've
Right.
got two reasonable sections either end.
Okay. Good.
But you're right.
Terrific. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Bill, and good to see you. I'm going to hand over to Kirsten now to a little bit of agenda left. We don't have a special motion for the life members because we didn't get round to confirming that. So that'll be put off till next year. Kirsten, any updates you want to pass on?
I'm a bit on the spot. So there is a ton happening in the management committee, and everybody's working really hard, and it's really wonderful. We're really grateful for everybody who actually responded to our call out for tracks and access issues. We're working through those and towards sending in requests to your local MPs to request that they ask for funding for those local tracks in their area so that their constituents can enjoy walking and the benefits that it brings. David notes that the New South Wales government has been spending millions on the kind of, you could call A-grade tracks, but we also have a network of minor tracks that aren't, what do they call them? The A-grade tracks.
The gold standard tracks.
Gold standard tracks, yeah. Whereas, we're quite happy with a silver standard track, I think. At least one that's not eroded and overgrown and passable, basically. So that's what we'll be asking your local MPs to do, and I encourage you to use the form. We'll put it in the this month's newsletter. Use that form to tell us about tracks that your local MP can fight for you in the budget next year. There's some simple risk management and insurance tips we'll be sending around. Keep your eyes peeled for the newsletters coming up. It's actually our last general meeting for the year, so I hope you all had a great year, and we look forward to seeing you next year. We've got some more great general meetings lined up with some great speakers. We've done some work with Protect Our National Parks, who are attempting to keep commercial development out of our national parks. So that group is going up gangbusters, and we will probably hear from them sometime next year at one of our general meetings. I think that's enough for now.
Okay, thanks, Kirsten. This next, yeah.
Sorry, one thing. Never forget our leadership training. We are so pleased that everybody loves our leadership training, and why don't you and your members go and check it out, and we are sure it will help your club thrive.
Thanks, Kirsten. The next item, we just turn it over to clubs to give any updates or pass on any interesting news or anything. Anyone got something interesting to add from out there? All quiet? All right. Kirsten, we got any giveaways tonight?
I'm sorry, I haven't thought about giveaways. Oh my goodness. Well, we can rustle up some. I haven't done that.
What we usually do is I just read out some numbers and then you send them a nice prize.
Mhm.
And as long as they're not on the committee, they can accept it. So how about I just do this? There's 30 participants, 9, 19 and 27.
Okay.
If you can, you know who they are?
I'll just have to. Oops. Actually, that's not going to work. Okay. It's a bit tricky when I'm not at home at the moment, so I don't have the extra screen, and it's a bit tricky for me to write things down at the same time. So,
I'm going to go down the list. You know, 9 is Glenda Rothwell.
Thank you.
thanks, Glinda.
All
Could
these
you?
people are on the committee. I'll just keep going. There we are, Mark Norris.
Okay. Excellent.
I'll
Congratulations.
keep going. Sean Walsh.
Fabulous. Thanks.
So you chase them up and you can send them something.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thanks, Kirsten.
No worries. Congratulations, everybody. Thanks for coming along.
Yes, I'd like to add that. Thank you for coming along tonight. And I wish you all the best for the summer and happy walking and what other activities you enjoy. Have a great summer.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. See ya.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good
All
night.
right.